Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, just a quick heads up that my audio in this interview is going to sound quite tinny. I apologize for that, but fortunately Luke does most of the talking here, and his audio is perfectly clean. I've been experimenting with different mics and different headphones, and unfortunately this experiment didn't go as I planned. Thank you for your understanding, and now let's get into the interview. Yo, dear listeners, hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today I have an interview with Luke Leaman. Luke, welcome.
Hey, how you going?
Today, what I would like to discuss with you is the physiology of fat loss, aspects of it that don't get talked about much because most people stop at the um, typical comment that we all hear about. It's just a calorie deficit. So as long as you eat fewer calories and move more, you're going to lose body fats. And before we get into that, just like I do with all of my new guests, I would like to ask you this question to introduce you to my audience. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you so awesome at it?
Oh man, it's so hard for me to talk about myself. I've always been the kind of guy it's like just pushes it off. So I don't know how to answer the awesome thing. Yeah, look, I'm an educator. I still train people. I'm probably one of the few educators in the business who still actively train people. Most of them don't, and I think I think it's a big mistake. I think you still have to maintain a roster of at least a handful of clients because that's where you test your theories out. That's where you see things. That's where you sharpen your sword. So I guess business owner with my wife. I'm a science nerd. I just love fitness and health and training, physiology, and I love the biochemistry and the physiology, not just the training aspect. I got into it as a kid for the training, and over the years, like I got into it at a weird time. This is going way back, like in the 80s, where we didn't have the internet. So we had to figure everything out through books or like somebody's brother's uncle's trainer would tell you some stuff, and you would just pick up stuff as you went and studying physical culture history. It's a completely different world to now where you can just get all the information at the touch of a finger. But the problem is now you don't know, like there's so much information, what information is good and what information is not good, so it's hard to discern with that. So that's where I come in with the educational side of the business is I read research, I look at that and I compare it to what I found with my experience, with the experience of my colleagues, with the experience of my coaches and my clients, and I funnel down the things that people really need to know. And I try to disseminate what is the actual truth of what's going to get things done. Because for a long time, we've had this evidence-based crowd who only look at peer-reviewed research. And peer-reviewed research is really important, but we also have to understand that it's limited. When you do a research paper, they're looking at one or two different things. They're using a low subject pool. They're using not very long time span. Like it's not uncommon. A long study for what we do is 12 to 16 weeks. And that's not really long enough to see anything. And usually like 13 subjects, 7 in the experimental, 6 in the control. So while research is important, there's a lot of limitations on that. And so it's hard for me to call that like evidence, where a lot of the evidence comes from being in the gym, under the bar, training people who are under the bar, and then making sure you take meticulous notes and data. So I try to compare both of them. And probably my favorite quote is by Dr. Laurent Bannock: "Don't be evidence-based, be evidence-informed." And I think to kind of whittle that down a little bit more, evidence comes from a lot of different places. You don't have to be a scientist in a lab coat in $1 million lab to get evidence. You get evidence every day with the clients that you train. And so I try to teach coaches, this is what I found over the last 30 years. This is what the science says, or the formal science. Where can that stuff meet in the middle? Because both sides are equally as important. So yeah, I guess that's what makes me awesome, is I kind of stay in between, and I make my own decisions, not just based on what research says, but on what I see in the research, and then weighing that against what I see in actual practice, and being able to take really sciencey mumbo jumbo stuff and water it down enough to where people can understand it that don't have a solid science background, but don't water it down so much that it loses its value.
I agree. That's definitely what makes you awesome. For one, you are awesome, otherwise you wouldn't be
Thank you.
here. It's my podcast. Number two, I thought that that was exactly what made you stand out to me because, dear listeners, I got to meet Luke somewhat recently at the end of August. I went to a seminar that he hosted with his company, and I was absolutely so impressed with the not just the amount of knowledge that you have, Luke, which is which is clearly the fruit of decades in the fitness industry, but the way that you can deliver that in a way that even people who are not at your level, because I don't think there are many people at your level, can understand. So that's why I wanted to have you here today, because my listeners, there may be some coaches among them, but a lot of them are my clients, so members of the general population, and I want them to have access to somebody who can do that, who can educate and help them make sense of what evidence we do have with the amount of experience in practice that you have in a way that they can easily understand and apply to their own lives. So to get into the first question then, during the seminar that I just mentioned, you used this quote, you brought up this quote that I mentioned earlier. It's just a calorie deficit. And as far as I can remember, you mentioned that it is technically correct, but it's also overtly simplistic. And I think that's a great place to start with my questions. And my first one would be, why do you think that?
Yeah. Okay. So, look, at the end of the day, losing weight or putting weight on is a simple algebraic expression. It's A minus B or A plus C, or A minus B or A plus B equals C. That's it. Like that. If you eat more than you expend, you will put on weight. If you eat less than you expend, you will lose weight. But now the nuance comes into, what is that weight made of? Because if you were to go into a surplus and you didn't lift weights, most of what you would put on would be body fat, which is probably not what somebody's goal is. And if you were to go into a deficit and not lift weights, you would lose a lot of muscle tissue, which is again what we're trying to keep people from doing. Like if I had someone hire me to coach them and they said, I want to lose weight, and I go, okay, this is how we do it. We strength train at least 3 days, 4 if you can, 2 if that's the absolute minimum. If that's all you can do, 2 days a week, and you have to lift weights, and we go into a deficit. If they go, no, 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 I would rather not lift weights and just starve myself. I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. Anybody can lose weight if do a lot of cardio, like train for a marathon, don't eat any protein, and starve yourself. You will lose tons of weight, but you'll be so unhappy with the way you look, and you will completely wreck your health. So there are things that we have to add to that SECO equation that dictates what you're gaining, what you're losing, whether you're doing it in a healthy manner versus unhealthy manner. And then if we get into the real big nuance of, say, programming, how much weight training do you do? Well, that depends on how your diet's set up. Okay. How much deficit do you do? Well, that depends on how your weight training is set up. And I think you probably remember me saying you have three main levers you can pull. You can lean on diet, you can lean on training, or you can lean on a little bit of both. So that basically means is that if I'm going to go into a deficit to lose body fat, and I want to lean on my nutrition, okay, we have to write the nutrition first, then we have to write the training program, and the training program has to match up with the nutrition. Okay. If I'm going to lean on training, I have to write the training first, and then I have to write the nutrition in line with the training. Now, if I'm going to utilize a little bit of both, I have leverage to just equalize both of those at the same time, right? So, for example, I'm a big fan. You heard me talk about protein sparing modified fast. You heard me talk about big deficits. And that's one thing that a lot of people have gotten away from with the anti diet crowd. And they, oh, you shouldn't diet. Dieting doesn't work. Diet's the only thing that works. Like a deficit is the only thing that works, whether you get that through training or whether you get that through your diet. You have to, it's again, we're right back at SECO. You have to respect that energy balance equation. And it really shouldn't be calories in versus calories out. What it should be is energy in and energy out, because calories aren't a tangible thing. It's a unit of measurement, right? And since this is mainly going to be like a lot of your clients are going to listen to this is something they need to understand. Calories don't exist. It's a theoretical construct of a measurement of energy. So it'd be like this. So originally, I'm American originally, but I live in Australia now. And so I'm fully on the metric system. I wish America would get on the metric system and make things so much easier. But if I go if I said this was an inch, you would say, no, it's not. It's 2.54 centimeters. We're both talking about the same measure of distance. We're just using two different measuring systems. So if we go, I'm going to measure energy in and energy out, you could say calories if you were a normal person, or you talk to a scientist and they go, no, it's kilojoules. They're both the same thing. You could measure either one. So people need to understand it's realistically energy out, energy in, and that's all that matters. Now, when we go into more nuance, calories in, that's going to be dependent on not just what you're eating on paper. It matters what you can actually digest and what you can break down, what you can assimilate, and also what you excrete or don't excrete. It matters. Your calories out can matter on a lot of things. What's the health of your mitochondria? What are you doing for your non-exercise activity thermogenesis? What macros are you eating can alter this. How you're digesting and eliminating things can change this. Any type of medical pathology can change this. Medications can change this. Age can change this. Sex can change this. Genetics can change this. So now we go, well, okay, shit. Calories in, calories out. That's what everybody says. I'm like, yeah, that's true. However, that's not the whole, you could write a whole book just on that concept and not even scratch the surface of it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you've mentioned that a lot of people have gotten away, for example, for really aggressive deficits. And what you've talked about just now at the end was essentially hinting at the fact that different physiologies will respond differently to fat loss. And I'm connecting the two together because something that stood out to me during the seminar was that you were discussing aspects of fat loss that I've only ever heard from Lyle McDonald, and I've not really heard any more ever since. So we're talking about even before my time. Not that I've been in the fitness community for a long time, but he's been around for 30 plus years, and he's literally the only one who points these things out. One thing that I would like to discuss in a little bit more depth is how different physiologies can impact fat loss differently. And back during the seminar, you talked about three specific categories of people that I would like my audience to hear more about as well.
Yeah, and it's a good. I was going to bring up Law McDonald because I've got to give credit where credit's due. He's the one that got me onto the three categories and the concept of some of this stuff. And no matter what your opinion of Lyle is, because some people love him, some people hate him, he's just brutally honest and he just doesn't care. I will say he's almost always right. So he's very rarely wrong on things. Like there are a couple of things I disagree with him with, but most of the stuff I'd say is spot on. And I remember when I first started training, he used to train girls out of a gym that I worked out at. So I saw him like training his powerlifters and things. That was decades ago, and that was back when like Atkins had not really come back out yet. It even predated that. 'Cause you had the Atkins revolution or Atkins in like the 70s, and then you had the Atkins revolution thing that came out. Maybe it was that time or just a small time after that, but I read Dan Duchesne's Body Opus, and I was reading all these old books on keto dieting, and I was like, that seems really interesting. And it's really kind of how it lines up to how I eat anyways, because I was a protege of Charles Poliquin. And this is before I ever met Charles, but I tried the way Charles said to eat, which is basically protein and veggies. Just eat protein and veggies and healthy fats and see what happens. And it worked fantastically well for me. And it worked really well for most of my clients. Not everybody, because some people are inherently more tuned in to having carbohydrates, or at least higher amounts of carbohydrates than others. So everybody's genetically different, and physiologically different. But I remember I read Body Opus, and then Lyle did a whole thing. I think it was like 1996 or so, or 1998. He did a whole thing on a web page where he did Body Opus and he tracked everything, and he did weeks of this stuff. And I was like, man, that's really cool. And that got me going with all of this stuff of reading, like Dr. Michael Ead's Protein Power, reading the Body Opus stuff, reading anything I could get my hands on, the old Atkins books, whatever. And then that stuff actually exploded. And you had the Atkins New Revolution, you had South Beach Diet, all this stuff. And I found that worked for probably 60 to 70% of my clients. And so years later, I go back and I went, I'm gonna review that stuff again, because I use it. And I said, this would be really good in a seminar, because Lyle's never going to teach seminars and not everybody likes Lyle. So I'll do this and add in my stuff and other people's stuff, package it all up, give credit, obviously, because I'm a big proponent of that, and I'll go out and teach coaches this, because a lot of coaches don't know any of this stuff. And a lot of, especially younger coaches, they don't study physical culture history. They don't know who these people are. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to teach them this stuff and show them, yes, calories in, calories out works for everybody. However, that doesn't mean it's optimal, because there's certain times where your physiology is really different between different levels of body fatness. And there are things that are inherently faster and easier for some people than others. So with the categories that Lyle laid out, you have a category 1, 2, and 3. Your category 1 people would be the people who are really lean. Those are the people that, guys under 15% body fat. Yeah, you're pretty lean. If we're not talking like an Instagram social media 15%, we're talking about a real 15%, which is way leaner than people think. Most guys online that say they're, I'm 15% body fat, they're like 19 or 20. They're not even close. But so these are guys that can see the linea alba all the way, like at least all the way down to the belly button. And they can usually see the top 2 abs and some of the middle 2 abs, but they can't see the bottom abs yet. That's roughly 15%, right? And so with their physiology is going to be massively different than people who are category 3, which is on the complete other end, where you have guys who are, say, over 25% body fat. Okay. So I'm not saying that the same program wouldn't work for those people. What I'm saying is there are different programs that would be inherently better for them. So like for a really overweight person, they have plenty of stored energy on their body. So they can handle a bigger deficit. They probably don't need as much protein by body weight as somebody who's leaner. But if we equalize that out to fat-free mass, then we can equalize that to all categories. But the people who are really heavy, basically low carb works fantastically well for them. It helps with their dyslipidemia. It helps with their blood fats, helps with their triglycerides, helps with metabolic resistance. It helps open up channels to lose body fat faster by getting fat released and burned off. There are training modalities that were better for them, like cardio. I'm going to tell you right now, cardio is king if you're really overweight. Yes, you still need to lift weights. However, cardio is the best way, the easiest low-hanging fruit to building mitochondria, which is what overweight people don't have. They don't have well-functioning mitochondria. When you get really lean, you don't need to worry about that unless you're really out of shape. But if you're in shape and you're lean, what you need is more weightlifting and less cardio. So you have I'd use a lot of continuums with what I do. So if I have a continuum where I have a really overweight person on one side, a really lean person on the other side, and average people in the middle, you might have more cardio, especially aerobic conditioning, and minimal effective dose of weightlifting with the guys who are overweight. As you go down that continuum, now we're getting in better shape and we're losing body fat. So this physiology starts to change. So we may be pulling some of that cardio out and replacing it with weight training. And by the time you get really lean, now it's mostly weight training with very little cardio and mostly anaerobic stuff or mixed anaerobic. And the reason this is the case is that when you are in that category 3, the odds that you are very insulin resistant is really high. Okay. Very insulin resistant. You don't have a problem removing fat from fat cells, breaking fat down from fat cells and putting it in the bloodstream. You don't have a problem with it. You have a problem using it for energy and using it for heat because of the poor functioning mitochondria. So it makes more sense that you would do things that would beef up mitochondrial content and function. And then by the time you get really lean, the problem is basically persuading fat cells to relinquish the fat, because the leaner you get, the more your body doesn't want to get rid of that. But you don't have a problem burning it off if you can just get rid of it. So low intensity type stuff for overweight people, high intensity stuff for people who are already lean. That's pretty much what I found to be the fastest thing for them. And like I said, everything works. I don't want anybody to hear me saying, hey, you must do a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, or you have to do a protein sparing modified fast when you're really overweight. No. That's not the thing. You don't even have to do a low carb diet. Anything will work. However, I'm telling you what's going to work fastest and what's going to keep you satiated and able to stay on your diet. If you can just get over your carbohydrate addiction, you could go fiber, electrolytes. Don't even need really high fat. Just hammer your protein, low carb it, do your conditioning, couple of full body days of weight training. When you get into that category 2, kind of in the average body fat, start shifting your program. And by the time you get lean, we have a completely different program because you are more insulin sensitive. You're more anabolic towards protein and building muscle. And so now you can see like there's shifts in the physiology. So if we understand there's shifts in physiology, why would we not shift programs? Or why would we think that all programs are suitable for every people? It's like you and I have completely different physiques, right? So like if you and I do the same program, are we going to get similar results? Yes, because fundamentally physiology is physiology. But are we also going to get massively different results? Like I've been training longer than you've been alive. I'm built for powerlifting and strength stuff, right? So I may be doing mostly powerlifting type stuff and Olympic weightlifting with a little bit of bodybuilding. You might be doing more bodybuilding stuff and maybe more strength endurance. So it's like it'd be fallacious to think that a bench press, if I bench press and you bench press the same weight, that it's going to feel the same and it's going to operate the same. Those are actually 2 different exercises between me and you because we have completely different body types.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just as a quick recap, we've got these 3 categories, and on the 2 ends of the spectrum, we've got category 1, really lean people, category 3, the people who carry the greatest amount of body fat.
Mm-hmm.
Their respective bottlenecks are, for the leaner people, it's persuading fat to get out of the cell and get into the bloodstream. Whereas the bottleneck for people who have more body fat, they don't struggle with having fat in their bloodstream. In fact, their triglycerides in the blood are usually quite
Mm-hmm.
high. It's persuading the mitochondria to burn that body fat for energy. That's the problem. And you've talked about how for this particular population, usually cardio is the biggest lever to improve the health and number of mitochondria to accomplish that. When it comes to people who are really lean, you've mentioned high intensity type stuff. Could you characterize that a bit more and explain what kind of dietary protocols, as well as training protocols, might be more effective to persuade the fat to leave the cell and get into the bloodstream?
Okay, yeah. So when we look at we have a fat cell, and a fat cell, all cells have to be stimulated to do things. So this is why we have receptors, and this is why we have hormones. A hormone attaches to its receptor, and then it creates a downstream cascade of biochemical switches. So the biochemical switch for a fat cell, like one of them, is attaching to a beta receptor. You attach to a beta receptor, and this creates a downstream effect of phosphorylating hormone sensitive lipase, which then creates an alteration in cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP phosphorylates hormone-sensitive lipase. Hormone-sensitive lipase now starts to break triglyceride into diacylglycerol, monoacylglycerol, and there's some other ones. I'm only saying hormone-sensitive lipase because that's probably the one that people, if they ever read this, that's the one they're going to see. We have to take this backbone of triacylglyceride and break it down into a glycerol backbone and 3 fatty acids. Those 3 fatty acids are pushed in the bloodstream. That's how we get rid of it. So it's actually broken down via a stress hormone. One way it's broken down. So when you get lean, the easiest way to do this is to do things that now create a high level of adrenaline and noradrenaline, because those are the catecholamines that facilitate breaking down the triacylglycerol. So when you look at somebody who's really overweight, the fat cells can only get to a certain size before they have to push some of that fat back into the bloodstream. And this is how people get really, really, when you see people like My 700-Pound Life on Discovery Channel or something, and you go, how can somebody get that big? Well, the fat cells can only hold a certain amount. So when they get to the point where they can't hold anymore, they start pushing the fat back into the bloodstream, which is why they get high triglycerides and dyslipidemia, bad cholesterol, all this stuff. They have to start making new fat cells from pre-adipocytes, adipocytes being a fat cell. So you have like pre-fat cells, like baby fat cells, that now get turned into fully mature fat cells. So they have more storage tanks for this excessive amount of energy that's in their body. So that's how they get bigger and bigger over time. Now, keep in mind that they are already in tune to push their fat back into the bloodstream. The problem is they have an issue transporting that fat to where it needs to go, which is cardiac tissue, muscle tissue, any tissue that can burn body fat. Okay, so you go look at people who are really overweight, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have high blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, you don't have great vasodilation of your arteries. You don't have great vasodilation of your vascular system. It gets very difficult to move things around the body. So the fat cells, or the fat that goes into the bloodstream, goes through what's called reesterification, meaning it's bonded back to glycerol and put back into the fat cell. Okay, so like we talked about in that course, you have 4 things you need to worry about. The first thing is you have to release the fat or get it out of the fat cell. The second thing is you have to transport it to some place in the body that can burn it off. The third thing is we have to burn it off, which is beta oxidation. And the fourth thing is trying to prevent reesterification. So it's like if you were to eat in a surplus and you went and trained, you would release fat into the bloodstream because the training would pump up your adrenaline and noradrenaline, which would attach to that receptor and cause a breakdown of fat. But if you weren't in a calorie deficit, if you ate back the energy that you did on your cardio, that fat would just go right back into a fat cell or a different fat cell somewhere in the body. So it's like you absolutely cannot lose body fat unless you're in a calorie deficit. So it's like when we talked about you can leverage nutrition, you can leverage training, you could like write your program. Let's say your TDEE, your total daily energy expenditure, all the energy you burned over the day was 3,000. If you did 1,000 calories of exercise, but then you ate that back, so you ate 4,000 calories that day, you would never lose weight. If you did 1,000 calories of exercise and only ate the 3,000, which is your normal daily energy expenditure, you would lose weight and you would lose it really quickly. The only problem is doing it through training is the hard way of doing it. Logistically, it takes more time, it's fatiguing, takes more energy to do it, takes more dedication to do it. It's really difficult to lose weight through exercise for most people because they don't have time to train like an athlete. If you can train 12 hours a week, you could just eat at your normal non-training TDEE, you'd lose tons of weight. The easiest way to do it is to diet because it's far easier to pull food. The only difference is it's physically more difficult to train the fat off. It's psychologically more difficult to pull the food because people will just be hungry and they don't have any discipline to say, okay, being hungry is part of losing a lot of weight really fast. So I just need to ignore the hunger and make sure I stay hydrated and have some electrolytes. But kind of go back, I'm digressing a bit, but you know how I do it. I go on different directions. But to go back to it, like if you were someone who was very overweight, you don't need to do anything special. If you just don't eat, like you keep carbs low or keep carbs to specific times of the day, like around your workout or maybe for breakfast or carb backloading. The goal is to have low insulin more during the day than you have higher insulin. Whenever you eat carbs, your insulin's going to go up, and now your insulin's going to be up for a certain period of time. The goal is to utilize that when you need it. Like right after a workout is a perfect time to do that because you're already set up for recovery, or you're set up to a position where you need to optimize recovery. So having carbs around your workout's a good time to do it. You can have them a couple hours before so you can fuel the workout, have them right after to have an anti-catabolic and a pro amino acid uptake kind of effect, but then have periods of low insulin. So maybe you have carbs for 4 or 5 hours of the day, but then you don't have them the rest of the day. When insulin is low, that allows the fat to come out of the cell more effectively. Okay. Now, when you look at somebody who's really lean, they need more of a catalyst because remember, the fat cells don't want to get rid of the fat. So the best possible thing we can do is something very high intense that is now going to bring catecholamines up to kind of, in a way, force the fat out of the bloodstream. And now they can burn it off because they don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just want to characterize what you mean by high intensity a
High
little
intent.
bit more because if
I,
people, otherwise, if they
yeah.
listen, if I were just a random off the street, I'd be like, do you mean hits? But haven't you just said that we should do more resistance training and less cardio?
Yeah.
So what's going
Yeah.
on?
Once I finished and started taking that drink of water, I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't clarify what high intensity means. Hit is a good, yeah. So hit would be a good thing, right? So your conditioning when you're on the category 3 side might be a lot of low to moderate intensity, steady state cardio, meaning you're going to have your heart rate around like 70%, maybe 80% of your heart rate. So like low intensity steady state would be around say 70 to 73% of heart rate max. Moderate would be somewhere around 80%. Now, if we go to the lean side, I'm talking about sprints. So like going as hard as you can for 30 seconds and then resting for a minute, minute and a half, and then doing it again. Now, you can see where that poses a problem when people are overweight because what are they going to do? Like, what can you would have to do non-impact. So, and you would need something that would allow you to build enough intensity. And intensity, when we talk about endurance, is a little bit different than intensity with weightlifting. Intensity with weightlifting is related to how much load is on the bar. Intensity with cardio is basically how fast you're moving. So we're talking about velocity. So it's like you could, if you got on a rower, you could make that high intense, but you'd also need the technical skill to be able to row, and you'd also have to have the lower back to allow you to roll. You could do it on ski erg, right? But it'd be, it's kind of a finagled way of trying to get your heart rate up unless you're really good at the ski erg. You could use a treadmill, but if you're overweight, now you're bashing your joints to hell. You could use an echo bike or an assault bike would probably be the perfect ones to do that. But if you're really overweight, it's unnecessary. Like, why would you pull out the nuclear bomb when we could be diplomatic and talk between countries and work it out that way? So like that would be low intensity steady state is we're going to work it out. Hit is like nuclear holocaust because in order to make it work, you have to go hard enough to make yourself nauseous, and it sucks. So that's why you have to be in shape for that first. And that's why it's better used when you're already in shape and you're already lean, because it's going to be a lot easier that way. It's never going to be, hit's never easy if you're doing it correctly, but you also don't want to make it worse than it has to be. So we want weight training as another form of hit. So it's like, if I'm lifting with intensity, meaning I've got a lot of load on the bar. So if I'm lifting with sets of say like 6 to 8, that would be a good marker of for Gen Pop. I think that's a good sweet spot. Once they're capable in the movement of lifting that heavy without injury, and if something goes wrong, something goes sideways, they can recover, then that would be a good choice. Like for more advanced people, I would say even lifting like sets of 5, sets of 4 to 6 would be good. Anything that's going to create a sense of danger to your brain is going to crank up the sympathetic system, which is going to crank up your adrenaline and noradrenaline, which is therefore going to stimulate fat to release. Now, you can do it through cardio too. if you do standard cardio, but you're talking about like high intensity, moderate to high intensity. But so I think to kind of sum up that, it's like when you're really overweight, you don't have to do anything super crazy to lose body fat. You just got to get the work done, and you have to control what goes in your mouth. When you get super lean, if you want to get even more lean, you're going to have to do harder stuff to get there. That's why you don't see tons of people walking around with a six pack and veins on their abs. It's too difficult for most people. Like, so for most Gen Pop, most guys that are Gen Pop would love to be 50, like a true 15%. And then if you tell them, if they go, hey, I want to be 12%, you're like, okay, getting the 15 was easy. Getting the 12 is going to be quite a bit harder. And if you get there and you want to be single digit, that becomes astronomically hard. And then getting down to say contest shape, like say 4 to 6%, is so stupidly difficult. I don't think people understand. And they'll always say, well, I have a friend who's 6% body fat year round. I'm like, yeah, your friend's skinny, tiny, and he was like that when he was 6 years old. Like, he won the genetic lottery. When you were 6 years old, you look like the overweight kid on the Goonies. Like, you have to understand genetics suck. It's like some people won the genetic lottery, some didn't. So it's going to be easier for some people. It's going to be harder for other people. But for most of us that weren't genetically blessed, getting down to those really low levels of body fat is so ridiculously, it's like the Stephen Hawking of getting lean. Like, it's like the Tesla of getting lean. Like, it's a genius level type thing. Like, and I don't know if that's making sense, but it's like, if you think about like chess, right? Everybody can play chess. Anyone can learn how to play chess. Most people can learn how to play chess and be really good. Very, very few people can think 20 steps ahead and dominate everything. Like, when you look at chess masters, like, it's like there's no way you're going to get there unless you were just blessed and you had the brain for it. It's the same thing with body fat. That doesn't mean you can't try. That doesn't mean you won't be successful, but it may be harder for some people than others. So let's pick what's going to make it the easiest, most direct pathway possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the fact that you've brought up how the there are more challenging goals when it comes to getting lean is a good segue for me to move into a topic that I think is near and dear to a lot of people, which is the topic of stubborn fats, whereby many people, and especially people who were assigned female at birth, so women, but also trans men, they find that they have these stubborn areas that take a really, really long time to lean out. And you spoke about this at the seminar as well. So I'd like to hear about whether this is valid, if whether that's true, and the differences between sexes, and how we can hopefully get rid of this stubborn fat.
Yeah. So if we look at it from a traditional body type and look at traditional body type of biological sex, most women are going to have a gynoid fat distribution, which means they're going to have hips and leg fat. Most guys are going to have an android weight distribution, which means it's all around their tummy, mostly, right? So you can think about it like gyno would be the traditional pear shape, and then the android would be the traditional like. Right. And then you have the weirdos that are ectomorphs and they look like the letter I. And those are the guys that were like 3% body fat when they were 4 years old. You know, they're always, but they have a hard time putting on muscle. We all have our own battles. Like, those are the guys that just lift for 5 years and just to put on like a half a kilo of muscle. Right. So everybody's got their own battle that they're dealing with. But when you look at the stubborn body fat, because of these body fat distribution ratios, there are different receptors that command that. So that's part of why it might be more difficult. So people tend to lose body fat fairly symmetrically until they start getting pretty lean. And then they start losing from the easy places, which, like, say for women, would be around their tummies, their upper back. And their hard places will be the last to go, which would be like booty fat, saddlebags, thigh fat. Now, with guys, it'll be basically umbilicus. So you'll see guys will get that. They'll have the full tire, and then their arms and legs will get really lean, and then it'll go down until it's like right at that mid navel area, and then down a few inches, and it'll go all the way around. And so now their tire's gone from like this to this, and that's like the last to go. And then some booty fat, right? When you start getting what we call acorn butt, which is like you can squeeze your butt and the muscles look like an acorn. So now for a lot of guys have it easy because we don't really have that many trouble areas. And so guys, if you just keep dieting, you'll get lean, right? And it's just the function of being a dude. But with women, a lot of times they'll get super lean everywhere and then they'll have areas that are resistant. Now, one option is that you just got to keep dieting. Like you're only as leanest as your fattest pinch or your fattest area. So a lot of people will give up at that point though, because when they're losing it symmetrically, they can see they're looking better. But then they get to a point where now it doesn't look symmetric anymore because they're losing a lot more. It's going faster from the easier places. So they start sometimes looking worse than when they were just a little bit more robust, we'll say. Um, so then a lot of times they'll give up because they didn't see any trouble areas until they lost fat around those trouble areas. Now they see the trouble areas and it can mentally screw people over. So one of the things is basically you just got to keep dieting. And that can suck because then, you get overly lean somewhere and you might not like the way you look. The secondary thing is just to understand that you have different receptors, and those beta receptors we talked about are one side of it. The other side is alpha receptors. And alpha receptors can now keep fat in the cell. Now, one of the easiest ways to release those is a low insulin. So now we're back at what we talked about with having time periods of high insulin and time periods of low insulin. And maybe instead of saying like, because intermittent fasting is a big thing with people, like a 16-8. What I would say is not necessarily intermittent fasting, but intermittent carb periods or intermittent insulin periods, where you might do the same thing of like a 16-8, or you might do like an 18-6 or a 20-4. And in that small window is where you put all your carbs. And like I said earlier, I'd bulk all of that around my workouts. That'll work fantastically well because insulin activates those alpha receptors and keeps the fat locked into the cell. Now, if we keep a low insulin state, we can bypass some of that issue. But at the end of the day, a lot of those trouble areas, you just have to continue dieting. That's the only way you can do it. Now, what sucks is that people will get leaner and then they'll get discouraged because now they see those trouble areas. So they go off the wagon and they start overeating again and putting fat back on. Here's the problem. You don't put the fat back on symmetrically. You're probably going to put that mostly in the trouble areas, which now makes the problem even worse. So you're better off just understanding that you're going to hit a period where you might not like the way you look. You have to keep going. And if you decide that you're tired of keeping going and you want to break, don't go overboard and put a bunch of fat back on, because there's a really high potential for it to go into those trouble areas. And now it's going to be twice as hard the next time you try to get lean to get rid of the trouble areas. And if you do this, if you yo-yo 6, 7, 8 times, it's just going to be astronomically difficult by the time you go, okay, I remember what Luke said, I just have to keep going. Okay, you go until you get tired of it, then reverse out of it, but don't reverse out to the point where you put fat back on. Reverse out to where you can now kind of cruise a bit and get rid of your diet fatigue, and then slowly get back into it and try to make that next drop. For women, I'll do this a lot where I'll take them, maybe they're 35% body fat, and we get them down to say 26%. And that's where they start seeing some trouble areas and they start getting discouraged. I'm like, okay, let's put the brakes on the dieting. Let's reverse out a little bit and let's kind of cruise and take a couple of months. Maybe we do some hypertrophy stuff and build up your upper body so it looks more symmetrical with the lower body. Then we'll go back into it and see if we can drop the next couple of percent. We do that. And then, okay, let's pull them out of it. Let's build the upper body a bit more. And then we go for the next 2%. But the key is to make that forward progress. And then if you're going to stop at that point, don't slide back. Don't let it push you back to where you were. You have to maintain that somewhere around where you finished. and try to maintain that for a bit of time. And that's where I would highly advise, especially women, to work on their upper bodies, because women are inherently just traditionally bottom heavy. And that's also one of the things that visually is sometimes an illusion. It screws them up because they lose a lot of fat in their upper body, and now it looks like they have a different upper and lower body. So it's like, let's go into a hypertrophy phase and build up some muscle, but let's not do it in a way where you're going to put on a bunch of fat. We just want to try to put on muscle and just take months and months of upper body work. Now, if your upper body is bigger, it makes your lower body look more symmetric. Now, when you start to diet down again, it's going to take a few more percent before you go, oh, I can see the trouble areas. Okay, let's stop, build up the upper body. Let's just keep going through this process over and over, and eventually everything will look symmetric. But in that case, I think what a lot of women should focus on is more bodybuilding type work, and thinking about like building shoulders, especially the medial delt. If you can get the shoulders to be a little bit wider, it's always going to make your hips look more narrow. If you look at guys who have a more of a mesomorphic type build, like I have, kind of wide shoulders, narrow hips. Okay. You look at a woman, wide hips, narrow shoulders. So how do we equalize that? Well, build bigger shoulders, and now they'll look more symmetric with your hips, and then diet down the hips. It just makes sense to do it that way. Whereas someone that had, like myself, I have to make sure when I train my legs that I focus on quads, especially the outside quad, because if my outside quad shrinks because my shoulder's so wide, it makes me look like I have no legs. So again, everybody's got their own battles that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I would only add that building the lats can also
Oh
add
yeah,
to the illusion, because then it makes you
100%.
makes your waist look a lot smaller.
100%. I'm glad you brought that up, because it does. It does. And especially if we have women that already have kind of a slim waist, if you train the lats, it gives us nice tie-in, because if you just train the shoulders, you're going to have like these shoulders and like straight down. So you have this symmetry that kind of flows out that way. It directs the eyes to more of an hourglass shape, which is what a lot of women love. They like that hourglass shape. Like Marilyn Monroe, you think about Marilyn Monroe, she's the first one where everybody's like, ooh, the hourglass shape, and all the women want to look like that. And so if you aren't, if you're, if you're, if you have a traditional phenotype or a traditional genetic structure of most women, where that top is a little bit smaller and you're losing body fat and you lose it too much from the upper body, how am I going to make that hourglass shape? I'm going to have to do some other tissue has to grow. Okay, let's build muscle tissue to now even that out a little bit.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm also glad you brought up the importance of understanding the phasic nature of dieting, because in the typical view of somebody who enters the fitness community for the first time, we're all told, okay, go on this diet, you lose the fat, you'll be happy. When in fact, for a variety of reasons that you brought up as well, psychological reasons, stubborn areas reasons that are at the end of the day related to psychology anyway. Um, the approach of expecting that one diet will make you look the way that you want simply doesn't work, because for one, most people don't just want to look like a smaller version of themselves. They want to lose the fat and have some muscle there, which is going to be a lot easier to build if you're not always in a calorie deficit. And number two, psychologically, dieting for months on end is really difficult. And so it makes sense after 12, 16, 20 weeks, maybe you get tired of it and you need a break. And expecting to drag yourself to the finish line is just unrealistic, at least in the context of the clients I've worked with.
Yeah, and also look, a lot of people don't realize, because okay, when I got into the industry, there weren't that many people at the gym, and it was mostly dudes. There weren't that many girls. Like the girls that came in were the girls they were bodybuilders, right? And that was like a really weird taboo thing for women to train, because they didn't want to get bulky. Weights made her bulky or whatever. And they didn't. They were like, they've always been told that women can't be strong, which is also bullshit. And so now we have this really good transition where we have way more women in the gym. Women are now actually lifting hard, wanting to get stronger, wanting to grow muscle. I think this is fantastic. Um, And I think that a lot of the women that are going in, they need to understand that it's also a very slow process. So you're not going to lift for 3 months. I know everybody looks at these transformations online. I was talking to a mentorship student about this. Every radical transformation online you see, the people are on drugs. Full stop. Full, and they'll say, no, my clients aren't on drugs. I'm telling you right now, the amount of people on drugs in our industry right now is absolutely skyrocketed over the last few years, and the clients on drugs have skyrocketed. So don't use someone's 12-week transformation if they've gone from zero to hero as your proxy for your development, unless you're going to take performance enhancing drugs, because that's exactly how they're doing it. There's a finite amount of muscle you can put on without drugs. And women, they don't put on muscle that quickly. They will at first, but then it slows down, just like it does with guys. But guys tend to maintain a bit higher muscle mass gain. It's not by much, but it's abysmally slow for both men and women. So they need to understand, you can't, if you just diet down, you've never trained before, and you're just now starting to lift weights. If you just diet down, you're going to be really unhappy with your physique, because you could diet down and look the same, just smaller, or you could diet down and look absolutely horrid. You could diet down and have the physique of a coat hanger. And when people go into the gym, I don't think they're looking at it like, hey, I just would like to be skin and bone. Most people will want to have some shape. That you have to build muscle to have shape. So you have to have these periods of time where you go, okay, we can't focus on fat loss right now. We need to focus on building strength and building muscle, and having that kind of biphasic. So I actually wish every woman who went into the gym would start with strength and hypertrophy first and not worry about their body fat. It would make it so much easier if they would just eat even at maintenance or maintenance minus 10, and just hammer 6 to 8 months, even 12 months of building muscle and strength, and then dieting. Oh my God, they would be gobsmacked at how fast the fat falls off of them when they switch from a really long, I don't want to call it bulking, because we're not trying to bulk. We're still, if you eat at maintenance minus 10, you eat high protein and train hard, you're still going to be losing fat. It's just going to be really slow. But if you do that for a year, let's say you did it for a year, and maybe I don't know, you only lost like 3 kilos of body fat, but you put on 6 kilos of muscle. You're going to look so different. You're going to feel different. You're going to perform different. And then when you move into an actual dedicated fat loss phase and you pull, say, 700 calories out, the fat will just basically start melting off of you. And then have a beginning and end, and say, I'm going to spend 3 months, I'm going to do it hard, and then I'm going to go back into 6 months of building. But the problem is that people have such a short-sighted viewpoint of things. They look at things like 12-week transformations, 10-week transformations, 6-week. Now we're going to do a 24-hour transformation. That's what the industry has led people to believe, of how fast this stuff can happen to build the physique of your dreams. And it's complete lunacy. If people would just look at it from, how do I want to look by the end of 3 years? So let's plan out your next 3 years and how that's going to look. Man, they would be so much happier, because you get people that get on the dieting roller coaster, and 3 years later, they still hate the way they look. Yeah, that's because you've been planning 12 weeks at a time, instead of going, okay, I'm going to plan out 3 years, and I'm going to look my best in 3 years. And I'm going to be so grateful that I spent the time doing it. And I'm going to be happy, and I'm going to be proud of what I did. But no, people want to look at it workout to workout and week to week and, quarter to quarter, which is the wrong way. This is a marathon. It's a marathon done with weights, with high intensity.
I do wonder if social media have worsened this lack of perspective that people seem to have, because we just see photos without context. For example, even in the case of people who don't take performance enhancing drugs and they have a 16-week transformation, uh, by the nature of physique changes, the illusion is that they're going to look bigger by the end because their
Yeah.
muscles pop out more. So I'll have clients question that and say, well, how did that person turn into that by the end of the 16-week period when you've told me that it takes so long to build muscle? And because the pictures don't have context, people aren't aware of the fact that the person that had that transformation started out with muscle that they spent 5 to 10 years building. So it does make me wonder if the ephemeral and the ephemeral nature and also the lack of context that social media tends to have has worsened people's perception
100%. And the
in
thing,
this respect.
pictures lie. Like, you can't see things in pictures. Even if you had even a low to moderately a low to moderate amount of muscle mass, like nothing, like average muscle mass of somebody who had trained a year or something, and you do a transformation, you're going to look bigger in the picture because you can see the muscle and the fat's gone. So you could have somebody who's, say, 80 kilos. Let's say you had somebody, well, let's say somebody 80 kilos and 25% body fat. And then 12 weeks later, you see a picture of them at 6% body fat, and you're like, good Lord, look how big they are. But they may only weigh like 65 kilos. Like, they're actually way smaller than you think. I remember a friend of mine went to a bodybuilding show in Austin, Texas, which is where I spent most of my early adult life. Once I got once I turned 18, I left my little tiny poor country town and I moved to Austin. And there's a guy there named Dave Gooden, who's known as the Texas Shredder. Super good dude. He's been in the bodybuilding world for multiple decades. And he used to be in the magazines like Muscle and Fitness and Iron Man magazine. If you go pull out old Iron Man magazines, you will see him in some of the pictures, and he looks absolutely enormous. So he was going to guest pose, and we were at a bodybuilding show. My friend goes, "I can't wait to see Dave Gooden. I want to see how big he is." And I went, "Look, I'm going to just preface this so that you aren't surprised. He's a tiny little dude. He looks massive in pictures, but he's tiny. He's like a buck 65." And he was like, "What?" And he looks like he's 265 pounds in pictures. I'm like, he's not a big dude. He's diced and he has a amazing physique, but when he comes out, you're going to be really surprised. And he came out, he had hurt his, I think he had hurt his leg, hurt his foot or his ankle or something. So he comes out in like a boot and a cane, and he's got a pimp jacket on and a pimp hat, and they played Pimp Juice while he walked up the aisle, and he threw the thing off, started posing, and he's a fantastic poser. And my friend goes, "Oh my God, he's way smaller than I thought." I go, "Yeah, I told you. This is why you can't trust pictures." Like, I've met
Yeah.
guys, like, I remember meeting Gunther, who was like 6'4" and like 315. I remember meeting that dude, and like, yeah, his hands were so big when he shook my hand, his fingers are almost at my damn elbows. But like, you see guys like that, and then you see a guy like Dave Gooden, they look the same in pictures because they can play with perspective. But then you see him in real life, and you see one guy's 6'4" and one guy's like 5'10" or 5'9". It's just, but then you can't tell on social media, because social media is all smoke and mirrors and lies. It's Photoshop, it's angles, it's cameras, it's lighting, it's all this stuff. Like, you can make somebody look 10% leaner if you do the right lighting and the right angle of the camera, and you have a good photographer. And then, of course, they can touch it up on an iPhone app.
And everybody, even without using Photoshop, without trying to dupe people, everybody, even people who are not in the fitness industry, just people who go to the gym, because we all post our best angles, because why would we post our worst ones?
Yeah, yeah. Nobody posts. You never see that, and you see, like, in the bodybuilding side, you always know when somebody's gone off the rails because you never see a current picture of them. It's always photos of a couple of years ago when they competed. And because this is a real thing that I think a lot of gym pop people don't understand, is like, a lot of people, they'll do a contest and then they go off the rails and they put on a heap of fat and they look completely different than what you're seeing online. So then you're like, "Whoa, it's been Throwback Thursday from 2021 for the last year. I wonder what happened." And then you see them in person, you're like, "Whoa, they do not look like that anymore." There was a fitness chick that my wife really liked. And I remember we were in Melbourne at the Melbourne Arnold's, and I heard a voice, his American voice, and I was like, "Oh, that's so and so." I'm not going to say who it was. That's so and so, and it's always like, "Oh my God, And she turns around and she goes, oh, she doesn't look anything like her pictures online. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's the lie of social media.
Yes, I definitely don't think people have an understanding of how difficult contest prep is for bodybuilding, just like we spoke about when we were talking about category one people wanting to get leaner, but also because it is so difficult, there are very few people who make it to the actual contest, and you won't hear about that on social media because they're not there. You only hear about the people who win or at least made it to the contest. And also, there are very few people who are able to regain a sustainable amount of body fat without overshooting even their starting point at the start of the diet, because at that point your physiology is basically screaming for you to put some body fat back on. And most people aren't able, as you were saying earlier, to tune that off and gradually increase how much they're eating and letting their body fat come back on. Most people give into those urges because it's just physiology, it's natural, there's nothing wrong. It doesn't make them bad people or incompetent or lacking willpower. They are just doing what their body's desperately asking them to do. They no longer have the goal of contest shape, so they got no rails to stay behind, and they end up regaining a lot of body fat very quickly, and then they either disappear off of social media, and you're like, what happened to that bodybuilder? Or they keep posting throwback Thursday pictures,
Yeah.
just like you said.
The people at the top, are they've done it long enough where they can actually do it, right? They can do a contest. They know how to do it right. So they're not forcing it. They're not rushing it. And then they can ease out of it. But a lot of people at the amateur level will do that. They won't, they won't time it correctly. They'll rush it. They won't give them enough time to do it. They'll have to starve themselves at the end. They're doing crazy stuff to try to get the last little bit off. And then they get on stage, they get off, they have their first free meal in the last months, and then they can't stop eating. They just start eating and they just can't stop. So now, if we look at Gen Pop can go through the same thing, but the thing, most of them won't get to the levels of leanness, but the biology is the same. If you crash diet and you don't have the program written correctly and you don't have an exit strategy, most likely your exit strategy is going to be turning your mouth into a food vacuum cleaner and not being able to shut it off. And then you're like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that. And then you do it again. Oh, I shouldn't eat it. But it's your brain making you do it. It's not your fault, right? So it's there's no shame in this. There shouldn't be shame or guilt. It's a normal biological thing. Your brain will make you do things that you don't want to do. There's a name for it. You're hangry. It's like you get hangry, you reach for a Snickers bar or 50 of them, and then once you get on that roller coaster, it's really difficult to get off. And then the shame that you feel and the guilt that you feel then integrates a negative feedback loop or a negative habit loop that then makes you keep doing it. It's kind of like your brain's kind of said, fuck it, I've got food now, let's go. And you just keep going. And then you got to have a coming to Jesus talk, or whoever you worship. You got to have a talk with them and go, all right, okay, I've got to stop and I have to get back on track. It's like the best thing for Gen Pop in a lot of cases is what I said earlier, is just do the slow and steady route. It's boring, it takes longer, but it's way more sustainable and it's easier to prevent relapse, because you don't relapsing is the hardest part. But we have to normalize relapse too. We have to normalize that that's a normal thing to happen. But normalizing relapse and accepting that that's part of the process for most people doesn't mean that you just go, oh, relapse is good, so I'm just going to keep going. No, 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 no. It's a thing to say, I'm probably going to fail at some point. The point is to get back on the horse and not lay on the ground and eat bunches of donuts and Twinkies and shit. Like, accept that you did it. It's cool. Everybody does it. I still do it. Like, you saw me in Winchester. I was shredded when I got to Europe, but I'm there seeing friends. I diet down because I know I'm going to put on 4 or 5% body fat, because there's beers there I can't get here. There's foods I can't get here that I can get there. I'm going to be having fun with my friends. I'm not going to be dieting at that point. So I diet before I go, and then I relapse, and I got home, and then now I'm shredded again. In the last 3 weeks, I just shredded it back off. But it's like, people need to have that, maybe periodize out what they're going to do. Like, if you're going to go on a holiday and you want to be lean for the holiday, give yourself enough time so you don't have to rush it, and then have fun on your holiday, get home, get back on track, or if you fall off on the weekend, recognize that it's okay, be better in the week, thank some calories for the weekend, and then try to minimize what you're doing on the weekend. Like last night, uh, my wife graduated this year with a degree in clinical nutrition. And so it's so weird. She graduated months and months ago, but then she got to walk last night and actually do the whole like ceremony thing. And so we went out to eat after it. And I was like, okay, technically I'm still dieting. And usually the weekend is where I have my refeed, but I'm not going to diet on a night that's special to her. So I'm going to eat what I want, but I'm going to say, okay, hey, Chat GPT, can you tell me what the macros, calories, all this stuff is for this, and what's the best choice on this menu? Okay, yeah, okay, I'm gonna get this burger here, cool, and I'm gonna drink, but I'm only gonna have 3 alcoholic drinks, and that's it, and it's gonna fit my plan. Like you got to be prepared. If you're prepared, and you then you can take action. If you're not prepared, like if I wasn't conscious about what I was doing last night, I would have had easily 2 of those burgers. I probably would have had 8 or 9 drinks. I probably would have had an appetizer. I probably would have had a dessert. I would have gone, because I'm dieting so hard, I would have gone straight off the reservation. But because I understood that what I was doing, I planned for it, and then I stuck to the plan. And then this morning, I got right back on the horse.
Yeah. What this part of the conversation brings up for me, Luke, is that there is a lot of misinformation in the fitness community, and that's why people lack perspective and understanding. And that's why it's, as coaches, as people who work and educate others and have clients, I think largely we need to do a better job of educating people, which then makes me think I'm really glad that I have the opportunity through my platform to connect with people like you so that you can speak to my audience and I can also speak to my own audience as well. And we can all hopefully reach as many people as we can. Although social media makes it harder because you will always reach upon more people given that it's faster and you can consume it much more quickly. But at the end of the day, we don't have control over that. We only have control over what we decide to do. And I think long form content is so much more educational and nuanced. And that's why I love having this podcast and I've loved having you on. I think this interview has been so valuable and has touched on so many aspects of fat loss physiology that, as I said at the beginning, most people don't talk about because they stop at the Instagram worthy sound bites. It's just calories in and calories out. So I'm glad that we were able to go further into that. And in closing, I'd like for you to tell people where they can connect with you and your company, so I can put all the links in the show notes.
Okay, cool. One thing I'm going to say one more thing though, because what you just brought up is so important. Because I actually have a friend of mine is visiting right now, and right before I got on this podcast, we talked about that of why I hate social media, because I hate short format content, because short format content only allows you to give enough information to be dangerous, but you can't fully explain something. So it's like you have to do a long format video on YouTube and then do a short format and say, okay, now that you've seen this 60 seconds, go to YouTube to get the whole story, because you've seen what we put out. I say things sometimes that has enough context to piss people off. So I get half the people love what I'm saying and agree with me, half of them disagree, and you see it in the comments. But we're doing that on purpose because we want people to think and we want to push people to like long format stuff. And you have to do this stupid manipulation crap for social media. And I hate it, but it's just a part of doing business these days. You can't beat them, join them. Right. But we were talking about that of like, if I had, like, let's say 50% of people agreed with me and said, yeah, hell yeah. And if 50% said, oh, you're a dumbass, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, go watch the full 1 hour lecture and see if you still agree with me, because you may not after you hear the whole thing. And if you disagree with me, you may actually agree with me when you listen to the whole thing. And I think we need to get people back to getting into long format stuff where things can be actually explained, and stop trying to learn what you need to do on TikTok and and Instagram. You know what TikTok and Instagram is really good for? Recipes. I love to cook, so I'll go there for recipes, but I'm not going there for training advice because there's no context. If I want training advice, I want long format, or I'll pay somebody to learn the information I want to learn, right? But anyways, so that being said, our god awful YouTube is, I think it's Muscle Nerds. I don't even know what our YouTube is. Holy moly. But Instagram is where we put on out our short format content to piss people off. And that's Muscle Nerds _ education. And then our website, which I'm about to redo, is musclenerds.net.
Excellent. I'll find the YouTube channel, don't you worry, and put the link in the show notes. And then I'll use AI to pick out a few choice words from this conversation, and I'll put them together into the most outrageous quote from you that I could possibly think of. Something like, women need to lift pink dumbbells and take specialized creatine if they want to lose the stubborn fat in their hips in the next 12 days. That will
Perfect.
be the quote. So then people will be like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm gonna listen to this podcast so I can dump shit on you. And then the listener will be like, oh, okay, never mind.
Perfect. I love it. Yeah, you got to do it. And you got to do it these days.
In any
Oh,
case, look, thank you very much for coming on.
I look really tan for some reason. I need to change my contrast. It makes my teeth look super white. I'm like, holy moly. All right. Something I got to fix.
You do.
Yeah. God. All right.
It's quite dark too, where you're in, at least from my perspective. So you look really tan with really white teeth that like glow in the dark.
I know. And it's like, that's not all right. I gotta mess with my settings on my camera.
Well, don't you worry. This podcast is audio only anyway. It's not on YouTube, so nobody will
Okay,
see that.
cool. All right,
I just
cool.
described it though, so it will still go down in the records.
Nice. Yeah, leave it in. Love it.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and dear listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And I will talk to you next time.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.